So today I'm joined by Tony Óg Regan to talk about his new book, MVP, which is out in all bookshops and online for anyone to order who's interested in the book. Tony, for yourself, relieved to see the book on the shelves?
Yeah, it's been a fair journey, Paul, the last 2 years really putting it together. I would have started with a writing coach in, I suppose, November 2023 to try and get an idea of what it might look like in terms of the content and the chapters. And, I was new to all this in terms of how to write succinctly. So Elaine O'Neill was the lady that helped me with that. And we put a kind of, she had a 12-week program that time that I signed up to. And over the 12 weeks, we got to a place of having maybe 50, 60,000 words in 10 chapters. And, that was really enjoyable process, although it was quite tough. You're putting probably the guts of 6 or 8 hours aside every week to sit down and write your thoughts on, your experience in life and how to make it relatable to people that they could see how it would benefit them in their lives as well. So some chapters were easier than others and some were quite difficult, but we got there in the end and I'm really, really pleased with the finished product, I suppose.
When did the idea first come into your head to write a book?
Probably a number of times during COVID when things were quiet. I think when I look back on things like I had a 10-year career at senior level with Galway. I had 10 years working as a chartered accountant and I'm going into my 10th year this year as, high performance coach. And I think it was a good time to maybe write about those experiences and put them down on paper and maybe share them with more people than just the teams or the individuals or the organizations I'm working with. So I would have tried a couple of attempts in COVID and trying to do it on my own, but didn't really know how to start it or have a middle or have an end. So, things opened up again then and it got kind of busy work-wise and went on the back burner. And then my good friend Jerry Hussey, I suppose, his first book was released and he was starting his second book. And, I said, Jesus, if I'm ever going to do it, I have to start it at some stage. So I suppose quarter four then in 2023, I just decided I'm going to go after this and make it a goal for 2024. And Jerry gave me a name of Elaine O'Neill, who was a writing coach at the time, and she was so helpful in starting the process and just been having someone to be accountable to and having to deliver two chapters to her every couple of weeks and she'd review them and I'd have to go back and edit them. It was a really good process for me for the 3 months to get me started. And thankfully from there we put the 10 chapters together and it became a book then to send off to publishers. And thankfully Hachette signed me up then pretty quickly after that and got working with their main publisher, Kira Dorley. And she definitely wanted me to improve aspects of it and edit aspects of it. So probably 12 or 14 months of a journey to get it to a place where it was going on sale and available for pre-order, etc. So yeah, a bit of a journey, but one I thoroughly enjoyed.
For people who aren't aware of the book yet, but for large people who are listening to this, I'm sure they're well aware now that the book MVP is out and everything. But for you, in a nutshell, what's the book about?
Yeah, I suppose the title is the most valuable player, and I would see everyone in life as playing multiple fields, whether you're a sports person now at the moment, you might be in education, you might be starting out in your work career. You have relationships and you have family and you have your health and different aspects. So we're all trying to, I suppose, balance a demanding life at the moment and maybe a lot been asked of us. And I wanted to give a book to people that they could use to help them just get clear on their own kind of thought process. Like what do they want, even 2025 to stand for? What goals and dreams, ambitions have they? What do they value in their life in terms of priorities now and what are their value system in terms of moral compass like respect and honesty and commitment. So chapter one really speaks to that in terms of getting clarity around what's important to you, what you want to stand for, what you value, what are the goals you want to go after. And then I've other chapters there like around courage versus fear. And very often the things that hold us back is fear, and fear of, will I be good enough to write a book? Will I be good enough to get promotion in my job? Will I be good enough to play inter-county sport? Will I be good enough to go to the Olympics? And, very often those fears can actually stop us completely from getting started, and we can remain stuck. So hopefully I will help people to unpack some of those fears and give them, tools and strategies to overcome their own fears and their own blockages. And other chapters there speak to things like challenge versus threat, which is, the mindset of looking at what can be gained from situations rather than what can be lost, and moving towards things with a more optimistic outlook around what could go well, and what I'm focused on wanting to happen rather than what I don't want to go well, or making mistakes, or failing at something. So that challenge mindset is really, really important in that chapter as well. And then other aspects then talk around, in my 20s, Paul, I would have suffered from burnout, definitely, where I was trying to, compete as an intercounty hurler with Galway, tried to get professional exams in the accountancy world. And I found I fell between stools, and I got burnt out. I underperformed in work, failed to pass my final exams, got let go from my contract, got let go from Galway at 24, and, burnout and motivation were all affected during that period with multiple demands. So, I have a chapter there around intensity versus recovery, and, life can be very intense at times, and it's important to bring intensity to different tasks, but there's also a time to slow down and reset and recover, and that's really, really important. And, thankfully the sports science side of it has got a lot better in sport, where there's more monitoring done of athletes in terms of their well-being and their mental health and their loads. And, those stress levels are monitored much better. And, I think for people working in different work environments as well, I see are very unrelenting. It's important that you kind of look out for yourself in terms of your mental health, and what are some of your red flags in terms of recovery that you need to be very conscious of to get the best out of yourself in terms of your personal and professional life as well. So they're the kind of different themes that will come across in certain chapters, and I would hope that would help people, be it you're a sports person, or you're a mum or dad, or you're a coach, or you're looking to progress in your own personal life or your professional career, that there's chapters there that will speak to you and give you kind of tools and strategies to overcome your own kind of internal obstacles that maybe we place on ourselves, in terms of even things like, a lack of confidence. And I have a chapter in there around confidence and self-doubt, and trying to move people more towards, confident in themselves, confident in what they bring to society and how they contribute as well.
That chapter on fear seems really interesting there. It's obviously a chapter where you don't always want people to automatically think the worst thing that'll happen straight away.
Yeah, and like when we're going out to, do things that are maybe deemed extraordinary, like win all Ireland's, or, you're going to speak in public in front of people, or you're going to write a book, or, you're looking for promotion in your job, that takes us outside our comfort zone, because we're going to do something that's maybe unfamiliar. There's certain skills we haven't used before, we don't know we have. And, straight away our brain and our body kind of get a bit, excited, maybe nervous, anxious around that. And, sometimes those emotions can be deemed negative, and they can hold us back from, pushing through that comfort zone, and staying with the familiar and the safe and the known, which is a lot of the time what we look for. But if you want to do kind of extraordinary things in your life, you want to push the boat out and get a bit better in different aspects of your life, be it around your health, your performance, your goals. There's times you're going to have to walk into that discomfort, and, experience failure, and have adversity, and, utilize your resilience skills as well. So, that fear versus courage piece is really, really important if we don't want to stagnate in life, and we actually want to progress in whatever field we're in.
From this book, are you looking for people to kind of lean on it and progress, not just from a sporting context, but from a life context as well?
Yeah, listen, I always felt that, you're a person before you're an athlete, you're a person before your job, you're a person before you start anything. So it's about really developing self-awareness around yourself. And also, when you do that, then you can be of more impact in terms of society, and achieving your goals, or, helping people, or, achieving sporting goals, or whatever it might be for yourself. So I would hope this would be kind of a menu that would give people, principles and perspectives around how you could, get the most from your potential in life, and help you to kind of navigate, the inevitable challenges that will come with life, whether that's rejection, whether that's illness, that's sickness, not getting picked on a team, not getting promotion, a bad day at the office, whatever it might be, that there be something in a chapter, something in a theme there that will stand out for you and it'll help you to, move from that feeling of stuck, from rejection to loneliness to isolation to, more empowering kind of mindset in terms of confidence and composure and, acceptance around things.
Just on it there, you mentioned getting dropped from the Galway panel at the age of 24, and I know we've talked about it previously on the podcast with you, but when you're talking about that in your book, do you think now it was a good thing to happen at the time?
Absolutely. I think when I look back on it, it made me look deeper into my own life in terms of what I was going to stand for going forward, in terms of my values. Did I really, really want to be an intercounty hurler again? Did I really want to become a qualified accountant? And at that point I did. And, I had to set myself up in terms of, I have a chapter there around process versus outcome. So I had to get a very clean and clear process in terms of how I was going to achieve that. The road wasn't that clear. I was off to go with senior panel, the club championship that time, Paul. You played 2 rounds in April and you wouldn't reconvene again till September. So there was stuff I needed to do in terms of the interim to get back up to that standard. And, I've outlined in the book in terms of working with Gary Ryan, a sprint coach, going to things like yoga and meditation to improve my mental clarity and focus and flexibility, working with a nutritionist to holistically improve my energy levels and my strength and all those things. And bit by bit, the Galway Intermediates would have started then at that time as well. And I went in with that group and played with a lot of good hurlers at a really good standard who had previously played underage with Galway and were playing senior club hurling and had been on Galway senior panels as well. So that helped keep my standards high from a hurling point of view. But, I definitely learned more in that year out about myself, been on the dole, been unemployed, having to pass really tough professional exams and having to find a way to get back onto the Galway senior panel when the route wasn't clear or straightforward, and having to, go into a new setup and a new environment and challenge myself and get out of my comfort zone, and deal with some frustration and doubt and, the sense of rejection that was there after being let go from the seniors after 5 years. And, I think it really hardened me for the coming years in terms of just having a more of an edge for things. But it also really gave me an appreciation when I did get back in with the seniors that, I didn't take anything for granted before, but I really was grateful for every training session, every gym session, every video analysis session we did, every match we had. I was really, really looking forward to it, really tuned in, really trying to get the best out of my preparation. So I really enjoyed those occasions more rather than seeing them as a pressure or something, you know, I could fail at or make mistakes at. And I think that shift in my mindset allowed me to probably have three of my best seasons was with Galway from 10, 11 and 12. And, the team did quite well in terms of winning national leagues and the first Leinster title and, been very close to winning Ireland 2012 as well. So, I felt they were very enjoyable seasons for the most part, even though there was challenges within them in terms of losing to Waterford in 11 in a quarter final and trying to rebuild from there. And changes in management and stuff like that. But all in all, that period in my life in 08, 09 when I was off the panel and having to, search for clues and answers within myself, was very much character forming for me and made me the person who I am today.
Do you see do you see it as a positive now being dropped, or do you still kind of look back on that moment of being dropped?
No, I see it as something that helped me to grow hugely, both internally and externally, and mature as a person, and get very clear on what I wanted to do now with my life and what I want to achieve. So I think setbacks, when you take them in the right light, they can be huge opportunities for growth. And I've had plenty of them in my life, and probably came again in 2013, getting dropped at 29 when you felt you had at least 3 or 4 more years to offer the Galway hurling setup. And at that point in time, it was, I want to do something different in terms of my career. And, being an intercounty hurler is now no longer a choice of mine. and I have to look at other aspects of my life now to, nourish myself and get a sense of achievement. And, sports psychology then took me down that route. And, it's been really, really helpful in terms of a career of helping people to, elevate their performance both in personal and professional life, both in business and sport and education. And, it's really opened up my eyes to other people in the country, other challenges in the country, and growing a business from there has been, very rewarding, but also very challenging at times as well.
It's really interesting there when you talk about the extra things you do to get yourself in a position to get back onto the Galway panel, and even for younger players now who are dropped. But how did you, I suppose, get yourself to do those extra things and turn it into a positive? Because obviously, at the start, when someone gets dropped, it is a negative.
Yeah, listen, there was probably a month or two there where I felt very lost and very alone and didn't know where to start. And lucky enough, I had people in my environment who were close to me in terms of Gary Ryan was in the college and my dad was working there and I had a good relationship with him. So that was a good starting point. Fergal Gertie is another fella I mentioned in the book. He was a physio up the road who, was training 3 or 4 times a week in terms of the gym side of it and the strength side of it. So would have worked with him on a one-to-one basis and found that really beneficial. And I just kind of wrote out a kind of a training plan and program for myself on a daily basis and a weekly basis. And, it helped with my focus, getting back that routine and just getting back feeling good in my body and mind again. That led into improving my study and helped me to do that a bit better. And then, results started to come in terms of your performances on the field and, passing your exams, etc. But I think deep down, it's that motivation on my side, inside that, internally I knew I wanted to be better. I want to be the best I could be as an athlete and as a person. And, it was never a sacrifice training for me. It's something I really, really enjoyed, something I was really passionate about and getting back and, helping Galway be successful and trying to inspire my own club and community was really, really important to me. So they were the kind of motivations for me during that time to, get back to Crow Park and play on big days and inspire my club and community and, try to be successful at Galway. And, that kept me going. And, Monday mornings when it's wet and cold and you don't want to get going, that was the internal motivation for me to drive on with the session.
When you look back on it, those 3 years must be particularly fulfilling from a personal point of view.
Yeah, listen, you know yourself, when you're sitting in a dole office or going into a post office in, 2009 to collect your dole, it is quite low. It is very low actually, because, 3 years previously you're starting off in your first professional contract at work. You're playing in your first All-Ireland senior final at 21 and, life is really good and you think it's going to continue this way. And, 3 years later to have no job, be unemployed, be unqualified as an accountant after 7 years in education, there's a lot of soul searching there. So when you get back on a Galway senior bus and you're going into Crow Park for an All Ireland quarter final or an All Ireland semi final or an All Ireland final, or you're winning a Leinster title for the first time with the group and for the county, you don't forget those moments on the journey home, like how far you've travelled and how much work it took. And it makes it even more satisfying when you do kind of conquer yourself in that way.
What's the highlight of your golf career?
Um, it's easy to say this medal and that medal and whatever, but I think for me the most sustainable thing from it is the friendships I've gathered from it and the experiences that we've had. Both winning and losing, both training and training hard and training tough and training poorly and all those relationships that were built in those moments with people and players. And thankfully when we meet up, whether it's at a club match or you meet lads on a night out or you meet them for a cup of coffee, all those memories that we had together are probably what we laugh and talk about a lot. And a lot of the time I wouldn't know where medals are or any of that kind of thing. So it's the friendships and the medals and the connections that we've made, over that 10-year period is most important to me. And, to have guys like Connor Hayes and Sean Silk and John Hardiman, at my book launch the last day, as well as former teammates like Kevin Hayes and Owen Lynch and Damien Hayes and Paul Doolan, that means the world to me, to be honest. And the friendships I've built with those guys and many more, they're far sustainable than, any medal or cup that I've won. So they're the biggest highlights for me is the friendships that I've made through the years with those types of people.
We can quite often see it when it comes to even intercounty setups that younger players can come in and they can be, I suppose, gotten rid of as quickly as they were brought in. From some of the details you go into this book, it's obviously examples from your own perspective. You're looking for younger players to use here, similar to what you say there, that it's not always a disaster. Why it might seem like it is at the start when you get dropped.
Yeah, and hopefully this would speed up the development for a young player in the academy or a young player starting out on his first season with a senior squad or an under 20 squad. That, I've made mistakes in terms of, you know, when I had self-doubt, maybe overtraining too much or overthinking things too much and, affecting my performance at training, affecting my performance in matches. It affected my mood and mental health on a weekly basis as well. So I hope this is a template that would help younger players, really navigate those obstacles that are absolutely going to come at them, whether it's an injury or it's an illness or it's not been selected or it's been off a squad for a period. I think there's very few athletes who will go through periods of their career where that doesn't happen. And trying to navigate that on your own is tough. If you haven't someone in the environment like, a coach you can speak to or a sports psychologist, well, then hopefully the book will be something that people can lean into and it'll help them move from feeling stuck and lost to, just getting back on the horse in a healthy and helpful way that will help them move forward and get momentum again and focus on the right things again to bring about those dreams for them and hoping they'll reach those ambitions for themselves as well.
You do mention that you've been quite a while now as a high performance coach in the area of sports psychology, and that's obviously something you go into further in the book as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose I'm my 10th year now working in that space and it's been hugely rewarding for me. I've been very lucky. My first job was really working with the Galway senior footballers with Jerry Hussey and Kevin Walsh. And, that was a really, really exciting time because, Kevin was trying to bring something fresh and new into the seniors. They hadn't won in Crow Park for 20 years. They hadn't got past quarter final in 20 years. I think Mayo had beaten us for 4 or 5 years straight in the championship, and one of those defeats I think was around 20 points. So, we were starting at a fairly low base that time, and to see the lads, work as hard as they did and get some of the success they did in terms of two Connacht championships, Division Two National League, playing in an All Ireland semi final and playing in a Division One league final where they could have beat Dublin as well. I think they made huge strides in those couple of seasons, and it's been wonderful to see Pádraig kick that on now as well in the last couple of years with more Connacht titles and been in two All Ireland finals. And I suppose the hope is that the lads will go one step further in terms of winning that. And from there as well, I got to work with the Galway Miners under Jeff Linsky and his team for a couple of seasons with Tony Ward with the under 21s. Obviously working with the tip seniors for 3 seasons under Mick Ryan and winning Munster and All Ireland's was, a really satisfying part of it. And then, there's been periods with, Limerick senior hurlers and Offaly and Ballygunner the last 4 years, as well as, multiple clubs around the country in football and hurling and, Camogie and ladies Gaelic as well. So, I feel I've been really, really lucky to been allowed into those setups, been allowed, practice best practice in terms of well-being and performing under pressure and helping people to deal with, the inevitable pressures and stresses of trying to, balance the demands of, your working career or your education with the, a high-level sports career. And, most of those people are really, really ambitious and they want to do those things well. So to be able to support them around those things on their journey, I felt very lucky to do that and very fortunate.
Just with that, when you're talking about some of the teams there, like they're some great teams to work with. From your own perspective, they must be great learning experience to work with such high performing environments.
Yeah, listen, I think I've been fortunate to be around such, high quality people, whether, it's the likes of, Paul Kinnerk, probably one of the greatest coaches I've seen in hurling for a season, and John Kiley and how he manages Darragh Sullivan, Ballygunner, David Franks, Kevin Walsh, Jeff Linsky. I think they're all, fabulous human beings and are really good at their craft and same with the players as well. Like, like multiple All-Stars, multiple Player of the Years there to have worked with them and seen how they prepare, how they train, the lifestyle they lead outside of sport. And they're trying to get the best out of their careers as well outside of sport as well. So, that's been a great learning experience for me as well. And to be a part of them high performance environments, I think it's been very, very helpful in terms of, building out programs for myself to help people in business and in schools and in education as well in universities. So, I've learned as much from them as hopefully they've learned from me.
It's interesting when you see the success Limerick and Everton have had. Quite often people think of the sports psychology and the role in Everton it's played, and it seems to be a buzzword at the minute. But then there's a lot of people who mightn't actually know what a sports psychologist does in an environment. Year round in a intercounty environment, for you, what's the sort of main role sports psychologists play?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of approaches that can be looked at. I suppose some sports psychologists will work predominantly on the performance side of it, and they look at helping athletes, perform better under pressure, whether that's improving mental toughness, concentration, confidence, their commitment levels, their emotional control in pressure situations. They'll also help them around lifestyle goals, whether that's, juggling the demands of education or their workload, looking at setting lifestyle goals in terms of sleep and nutrition and their well-being as well. And then some sports psychologists will work on the mental health aspect of it as well, and work with a clinical psychologist in terms of if there's any issues there in terms of mental health, whether that's anxiety, mental illness and disorders, whether bipolar diseases or depression or ADHD and aspects of it as well. So you're trying to come at it from that multidisciplinary approach where you're working on the well-being aspect of the person, you're working on the performance aspect of the person, and you're helping them around the lifestyle aspect of it that will help with obviously their mental health and their performance on and off the field as well. And then, working with the coaches and predominantly the management team too, and creating the right psychologically informed environment where, we're using some of these mental processes in our communication, in our coaching, in our routines and our disciplines throughout the week and throughout the month and throughout the year as well. So whether that's goal setting, whether that's mental toughness, whether that's rest and recovery, whether that's well-being strategies, all the management team will be aligned around that, and we'd all working off a program around that to get the best out of people, both within the staff, within the players, and within the overall wider environment, helping the team as well.
And Tony, this is obviously a role you're massively enjoying.
Yeah, listen, I think it's given me far more than I ever thought it would. I really enjoyed a lot of aspects of playing, but this has been a great in for me in terms of not playing at that level anymore, but been able to make a contribution and been able to help. And when you do have magic days like winning national titles with the teams I mentioned, they're special memories that we'll always have together. And, we've done loads of kind of group workshops and sessions as well where we've talked about, different aspects of our lives as well that, have been really special days and team building days together as well and training camps and, they've been all massively special times as well to share with those groups. So yeah, I feel very enriched by the career that I have now, and been able to be in those environments has been so rewarding.
Interesting, like when you talk about at the start about the fear versus courage and getting out of your comfort zone. I'm sure overall when you look at this book, there probably has been moments where you've got out of your comfort zone, but has it been nice in one way to write this all down on pages and pages of a book and go back through the different stages of your life?
Yeah, I think it's been a great therapy for me, I suppose, reflecting on, probably 10 years of an intercounty career, 10 years working in the finance industry as a chartered accountant, my nearly 10 years coaching, I suppose, in the high performance space and well-being space. And been able to get that down into, 10 chapters, 10 themes that, I feel is very relatable for people. There's a lot of practical stories from people I've worked with, teams I've worked with, and my own career as well, with exercises to make it very relatable for people that they can actually action most of these things right away that will help elevate their life in different aspects, whether it's around their health or their personal life or their professional life or their sporting endeavors as well. And I'm very proud of the final product that we've produced with HS, and I think it'll be really really impactful for people when they do start to read it and get through the exercises within it.
I seen last week you had your book launch in Galway. How's it been with the book now on the shelves, getting out to meet different people and talk about the book to different people?
Yeah, it was a kind of very surreal moment there with friends and family last week to see it up on the shelf and be booked a month in Eason's. It's not something I ever envisaged starting out at 9 or 10 years of age that you'd be an author and you'd have a best-selling book for the month of January anyway in Eason's. And to be getting messages on a daily basis for people that have started a book and are finding it very impactful. It's very heartwarming and very encouraging, and the response has been so positive from people. I felt blown away at times, and I'm very grateful for all the messages and the lovely well wishes I've got from people and the amount of people have bought my book already. It's been phenomenal. So, it's been a great experience, Paul, and I've enjoyed, the promotional work and trying to share with people even more what's in the book to, help them, encourage them to buy it and take on board the lessons from it as well.
We wish you best of luck with the book, Tony. And that is Tony O'Gregan's book, MVP. It's available in all bookshops and online as well for anyone who's interested in purchasing the book. And Tony, thanks a million for coming on to the podcast.
Paul, thank you for your support as always. Good